who's the chair of the Republican Study Committee, the conservative group in the House. How many members do you have, and what's your responsibility as chairman of this group?
Well, we have north of 150 members. We're the largest and I think the most effective caucus in Congress, and my role as the chair is to listen to the input of all the members of the RSC and to try to channel that into a conservative action plan that we can use to push the House leadership to enact conservative policies for the betterment of hardworking American families.
What's your relationship like with the leadership team in the House, and how often are you letting them know this is the pulse of the conservative wing of our party?
Well, let me give you my background first. I spent 30 years in business, and so my view in terms of dealing with anybody else is to try to go in and establish a working relationship. You may not agree perfectly, but you establish that working relationship. And then after you've established that working relationship, then you try to let them know, negotiate the best possible outcomes that you can. In this case, it's conservative policies for the betterment of our country. In terms of dealing with leadership, it depends on what's up. I mean, for instance, last Wednesday, we had our first luncheon, our first RSC luncheon, and the message came back from the membership of the RSC is we want to have an early vote on the full repeal of Obamacare. I've taken that to our leadership. I've visited with all three key members of leadership, the Speaker, the Majority Leader, and the Whip. And I believe we'll have that vote within the next 4 weeks.
Before you have a vote on the employer mandate, and is there consensus on what to do on the employer mandate of the Affordable Care Act?
Well, we've already done one thing on the employer mandate, and that deals with 30-hour week that's in the law versus a 40-hour week, because the 30-hour week rule was hurting employees. It was hurting hardworking Americans. And so the next thing we need to do is have a full vote on the full repeal of the employer mandate. I have talked to leadership about that. My hope is that we can have that fairly soon, but we need a full repeal vote beforehand. So maybe within the next 6 weeks we'll have the employer mandate repeal vote, but more than likely it'll be sometime in late February.
And do you anticipate then, or are you telling the leadership that you need to keep bringing up these votes for the next 2 years? Just keep trying?
Well, it depends. I mean, we've got one thing. We need to have the repeal vote because several of our freshmen and all of us ran on it, that we need to get rid of Obamacare. Still a toxic law in the eyes of hardworking Americans. They'd like to see it go away. But we as Republicans need to come up with what the 21st century healthcare solution looks like. And so I think that one of the early steps we need to do in terms of, rather than just having repeal after repeal after repeal, is talk about what our vision is for healthcare in America. And it's not a big government solution. It's a solution where you put patients and providers back together. You try to improve the markets or let the markets develop so that people have better coverage options at lower cost, and they can do what's right for their family and not do what a bureaucrat is designed for them.
There were, 50-some votes more in the 113th Congress on that?
Well, over the 112th and 113th.
Do you anticipate that many in the 114th?
In terms of repeal votes, probably not, because I think we need to start looking at what the solutions are going forward. We'll have some repeal votes. I mean, the 40-hour work week vote was essentially a repeal vote. The Hire More Heroes was a partial repeal vote, if you will. We need to develop the solutions that will satisfy what the free market can do in this country. The free markets are always better than a bunch of bureaucrats determining what will happen. And so we as a Republican Study Committee, we already have a task force that's working on this today to try to come up with a 21st century solution.
President Obama, of course, has said he'll veto anything to undo his law. So,
well, it's unfortunate because the president always puts himself between special interest and hardworking American families. I mean, American families are hurting because of Obamacare. And so when he comes out and threats to veto Keystone or a replacement, a repeal of Obamacare, he's just saying to himself, I put bureaucrats in front of hardworking Americans.
Are you concerned, though, that with this new Republican majority in the Senate, they're joining your majority in the House, that viewers might say, you've wasted time on something that's not going to pass instead of bringing up legislation that could help all of us?
Well, I think there's two things that we need to think about, and especially with King versus Burwell that's coming through the Supreme Court. which is likely to gut Obamacare.
Which is the subsidy issue.
That's correct, the subsidy issue, which will kill the mandates, which really just causes the law to implode on itself. We need to, we're not really wasting time. We need to be sure to set the vision so that American families know what we stand for. We stand for more jobs and better paychecks for them. And once we set that vision, and that comes through the repeal votes, and then it comes through coming up with the solutions votes. What's the new solution, which is not bureaucratically driven? What's the free market solution to help families be better off? And so I think there's a combination. We have to have the right balance. I think in the 114th Congress, now that we've got both chambers across the street over here, that we're going to get it right.
Is there consensus on this Homeland Security funding issue? Here from the Washington Times this morning, last week Republicans filed a $39.7 billion bill that would fund DHS through September, but GOP lawmakers are expected to attach amendments on the bill that would prevent funds from being used for implementing the president's executive order on immigration. Democrats say full funding is needed to carry out the agency's mission. Are you agree with the leadership strategy on this?
Well, we helped develop the leadership strategy. I mean, I think our leadership did a really good job this time. Instead of putting something together and throwing it out there for us to digest.
What are you referring to? The $1 trillion?
Well, no, throwing out I'm not talking about the omnibus, that's history,
Okay.
but moving forward, what they did this time is they got about 30 of us from really all parts of the Republican Party, some conservatives, some that were less conservative, and said, what is the solution to deal with the president's unlawful amnesty activity? And we worked collaboratively over the course of about 48 hours, and we came up with what I think is a good solution. And my expectation is that we'll actually, I think it's going to be bipartisan. So we take the funding issue off the table. We say, yes, we're going to fund the Department of Homeland Security, and I think that's important in light of the recent events around the world. But we also say that we're going to deal with something that over half of the Americans, of American families think is wrong, and that's the president overstepping his constitutional boundaries and enacting something that Congress clearly didn't intend for him to do.
Democrats say, though, that any disruption to the Homeland Security Department's budget could put the United States at risk for what they saw in Paris.
Well, that's up to the president. If the president, we're going to send him a bill, and if he signs it, Homeland Security gets funded. If he doesn't sign it, then Homeland Security gets disrupted. So it's up to the president. Is he going to decide that just because of his unlawful activity that he's going to shut down Homeland Security? That's the president's call.
Okay. Well,
I hope he'll make the right decision.